Hi, my name is Nicholas Dow, and I'm going to be doing a short presentation, short narrative presentation on Japanese Americans during World War II. So, for the start, December 7th was a tragic day in U.S. history. That day, the country of Japan performed an attack on the Hawaiian base of Pearl Harbor. The attack came without warning and killed 2,403 Americans and wounded 1,178 more. And this was a mixture of military and civilians. With that, over 150 aircraft were destroyed, with many, many more damaged. Uh, Also, three naval ships were destroyed, and 16 other ones damaged. The U.S. was very angry about this, obviously. Later that day, after the attack was over, Japan decided to announce its declaration of war against the U.S. After this day, the distrust from not regular Americans, but some Americans towards Japanese Americans was uh, starting to rise. Many Japanese American citizens were suspect of espionage and looked down upon, and many of them say that they could feel the eyes of everybody watching them, and it was very unnerving to them. So, the lies. Farmers of the West would run to Washington to claim that the Japanese Americans were saboteurs. A man named Austin Anson, who was a California farmer and the head of the Salinas Vegetable Grower Shipper Association, that's a mouthful, went to Washington just hours after the attack to claim that the Japanese were sabotaging farmland. I don't know how he got there so fast, but that's what the article said. They did this for profit, though. Obviously, they even admit to it with actual quotes towards media. Along with this, the people also ushered the push for the Japanese relocation event. Their claims that the Japanese took their land and, in quotes, took over were a lie. Austin Anson also said they undersell the white man in the markets and they work their women and children while white farmers have to pay wages for his help, aka hiring people. And later in the quote, he says, "We do not want them back when the war ends either." This is coming from a man who is extremely influential in the farming world of the West. Um, there were many, many situations where the Japanese were taken advantage of. One such instance is uh, houses. So whenever they had to relocate, the Japanese had to sell their houses, and the white people knew this and would only offer them. They would offer them really, really low prices on their house. Clearly, it's not what their land is worth, and the Japanese had no other choice but to take it. So that's just one instance. There's others that come down later in the line that I'll talk about at like the assembly centers and stuff like that. So, Executive Order 9066. So, with much push from both military officials and the people of the U.S., President Roosevelt signed the Executive Order 9066 on February 19th, 1942. Uh, just a little bit around 2 months after the attack of Pearl Harbor. This authorized the Secretary of War and appropriate military commanders to create military areas for the Japanese to go. These areas were in California, Washington, and Oregon, and eventually parts of Arkansas. They also provided instructions, which provided what and when the Japanese could do something. In the states, it states in the instruction number 2 that evacuees must carry with them on departure for the reception center or assembly center uh, the following property: bedding and linens, toilet articles, extra clothing, sufficient knives, forks, spoons, plates, and cups, and essential personal effects. And this is stuff that they can only carry, and it was for the whole family. Um, this applied to all Americans that were at least 1/16th Japanese, which affected the lives of 117,000 people, both citizen and non citizen. So I decided to put a little short slide about John DeWitt in here since he was so instrumental in the creation of this plan. Uh, as I said, John DeWitt was instrumental in coming up with the areas for the relocation camps. He had many, many different areas, or not areas, but ideas. They kind of were all shot down one after one, and then finally they kind of came up with a plan that worked out. Uh, and his original plans, though, he had the inclusion of the German and Italian descents as well, but that was immediately shot down because any sort of neglect towards Europeans was frowned upon for some reason. So for the assembly centers, 6 days notice is all the Japanese were given to get everything that I mentioned before in the provided instructions and head for an assembly center. These were often on like racetracks or fairgrounds, anywhere that's like really secluded um, or isolated. The more remote, the better. This is where they would be kind of tagged and sent off to different long-term relocation centers. So it's kind of like a limbo point to their final destination, kind of like a layover flight, you know. Some internees had the option to leave though, which I thought was extremely interesting. So another way the white people would take advantage of Japanese Americans was they didn't want to pay very high wages or wages at all for farm work, so they would send Japanese from these assembly centers to farms during certain seasons and make them work. Another way that they could leave was for college, which I thought was very interesting. I couldn't find too much about it, but I'm assuming it was for students to try to go back to school. So, relocation centers. Relocation centers were what the U.S. called the camps that the Japanese were actually sent to. This was like the your final destination. The camps were outfitted with armed guards, barbed wire. They had roll call, also known as muster. These were in isolated areas of the West, all the states I mentioned before, plus Arkansas. Uh, the relocation centers acted as a town, so they say. They had schools, post offices, work facilities, as well as farmland. They also raised livestock and would slaughter them for food and stuff. But with armed guards, you would think that violence would not ensue, but there were many occasions where violence actually broke out. So, August 4th, 1942, in Santa Anita, a riot broke out due to insufficient rations and overcrowding. I don't think anybody died there. I didn't see anything about that in the article. But in Manzanara, California, tensions were so bad that it resulted in the beating of a Japanese American Citizen League member by 6 masked men. This caused fear in the police, so they started tear gassing the crowds, and eventually a man was shot and killed. So that's two instances of a riot or violence breaking out in some of these camps, but it happened a lot more. I didn't put them in there because that's not generally what uh, power this presentation is geared towards, but it happened a lot more than you think, and a lot more people died. So the end of the camps. Fred Korematsu was a civil rights activist and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1998. His refusal to relocate to the internment camp became so legendary that eventually a day was created in his name, the Fred Korematsu Day, and it is the first U.S. holiday named for an Asian American, and I thought that was extremely awesome. His Supreme Court case was unfortunately lost, and it wasn't until Mitsui Endo went to the Supreme Court on the statement that the of the War Location Authority has no authority to subject citizens who are conceitedly loyal to its leave procedures. After a while, the government offered to free her, just her, and she said no. She said she wants the case to address all the Japanese. Um, so it wasn't until 2 years later that the Supreme Court finally made the decision to close the internment camps. But what they did, which what I thought was very sneaky, was they gave Roosevelt time to close the camps himself before the reveal of the decision. So in 1988, Congress issued an apology and passed the Civil Liberties Act, which gave over 80,000 Japanese Americans $20,000 as reparation for their treatment. I don't think $20,000 is enough at all. I don't think money is going to solve the issues that happened back then. I do not think a formal apology is is any better. I feel like it's more of a slap in the face for the treatment that these people had to endure. Um, I just wish they had something better. But this right here, This is who I call Grandpa Oki. This is my fiance's um, grandpa, obviously, and his name is Satora Oki, and he is one of the greatest people I've ever met. He's always happy, always smiling. He's unfortunately had a few strokes, but uh, he still is able to walk around and eat food. Obviously, you can see that he loves to eat food, and he still is very American. It's the Fourth of July. He's got his uh, Happy Fourth shirt on. Uh, he was actually in a internment camp in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona. It was called Gila River internment camp, and unfortunately, while he was there, his mother ended up passing away due to a sickness. So, this is who I decided to do this project for. I just wanted to include him in that. So, thank you so much for tuning in. And that's the end of my narration. I will include the works cited page and the um, reflection paper at the end in a different Word document. So, thank you so much for tuning in.